schools. When you look at the whole history of the Indian reserves, and it's got to be in the millions.
They want evidence. As a 7-year-old child, I witnessed myself the burial of a child, and I didn't know what was happening at that time. I was with another student, and I asked him, I said, "What's happening here?" I see them digging a hole in the orchard, and they said they're burying another one.
In '65, there's a bunch of us kids playing soccer in the back field. There was a brush of leaves and grass piled up, and there was a body underneath it. One of the kids kicked the ball, and he went to get it. It was quite decomposed.
Went to Waterbury in 1960, and I found a dead body in 1967 in between Ross Hall and Colwell Hall. Native girl, she was about 16, and I told Jay Andrews, and Jay Andrews shipped me out of Waterbury, went to Nanaimo, and I believe it was a cover-up.
And we need those children returned home. They need to be brought back and given a proper burial. And that's really kind of a most basic first thing that the churches and government need to do. They need to identify where those bodies are.
And I remember we used to go to big graves there, and they would be kids that came from Charles Camsell Indian Hospital. How they died, I don't know. But I know we just dug a lot of graves.
There was a lot of Eskimo babies buried in that burial ground, which was behind the principal's house. Just on the other side of the staff garden. There was 4 of us that dug the grave. Myself, my brother Larry, Mel Patsy, and Albert Cardinal.
When my mom was younger, her and a friend were instructed to go throw away this thing that was wrapped in a newspaper, and they were told not to look into it, but they didn't listen. They unwrapped it, and it was a fetus.
One particular incident was where a nun sexually abused, sexually abused a young boy, and as a result, the nun became pregnant and gave birth to a baby, and after it gave birth to the baby, this was one incident that they killed the baby, and they had the young fella dig a grave for the baby. Another incident was a lady witnessed a nun in Cranbrook where they gave a baby and had her participate in drowning the baby in the bucket of water, you know. And now it's become a cornerstone of some building in Cranbrook.
I would say that one of the biggest things that we're asking for right now is that where are those children buried, and how can we get them home? Is there any difference between what happened with Nazi Germany and what's happened over here?
The key now is to get a lot of the stories and the documentation out into the mainstream through these kinds of documentaries, and just keeping the international pressure on Canada. I think, for example, organizing an international boycott of Canadian goods, maybe a boycott of the 2010 Olympics, something like that. That's the kind of thing that's going to bring international pressure on Canada. I think that's the only way this stuff is ever going to come out, because the contradiction here is that the very institutions that committed these crimes are still in power. They're all legitimate, they're protected by the law, the government, the churches, the RCMP. These are mainstream institutions, and they're not going to prosecute themselves over this. They're going to have to be brought to some kind of international court of justice.
Is there one human that could be responsible for that, could be taken to court?
Yeah, any of the the fiduciary officers of these organizations, the Prime Minister of Canada, the heads of the United Church, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the superintendent of the RCMP, they're all just as culpable under the Nuremberg laws. Those precedents that say heads of state are just as liable for the actions of murder as are the soldiers who pull the trigger. Well, it isn't just the people in the residential schools that are liable for this, but these officials in the churches and government, which is probably why they've put so much energy into denying this stuff. smearing and assassinating the character of people like me who are trying to bring out the truth about this, and intimidating Native eyewitnesses, using their own chiefs often to do that.
Who's going to listen? You know, who's going to stand up? You know, in a court case in this country of ours, you know, minimum we need is $80,000 to $800,000 to start a court case. And how many lawyers in this country of ours that's going to stand up and fight for our just rights? There ain't any. And how many Indian lawyers we got have yet seen one to step up to the plate to take the fight all the way? Oh, I hate doing this.
You hear a lot about money, you don't hear about the actual deaths of children, and this is the issue we want to bring out now that's being systematically buried by the government and churches of Canada. It's being buried by the court process, which is accompanied by a gag order. If you're a Native person and you go through the courts, one of the things that is imposed on you is a gag order, so that you can't actually talk about the terms of your settlement or your story. And yet being able to tell one's story is essential to one's healing. And to being able to turn the tables, if you like, of shame. It isn't Aboriginal people who should be carrying the shame anymore. It's we, the culture that did it, who have to start carrying that cross.
Right on, right on.
So one of the ways we can do that is simply by telling the truth and forcing the truth out of institutions like this one. They have to come out from behind their lawyers and their money and their power.
It's hard to not hear the voices, not hear the cries, not hear, like they're haunting. And I pray that those little spirits that are captured in the air like that in pain, that they'd be released. I opened that window on purpose, to be released out of here, you know.
We've lost thousands upon thousands of children through suicide, not natural death, suicide. We find them every day of the week. We find them down in the city of Vancouver. You know, the city of Vancouver is just a small part of what goes on across Canada and the United States, because we have a lot of our First Nations people dying on the streets of Seattle. Because before the Europeans landed, our people traveled back and forth, and so they had relatives down there. And so we had, like in Vancouver, for instance, you have between 45,000 to 60,000 Native people living in the city of Vancouver. And you're probably finding pretty close to 90% of them are dying on the streets, you know, of drug abuse, not alcohol, drug abuse. How do I know that? Because I sit on the board down there with the Native Liaison Society that's attached to the Vancouver City Police. And I asked a question one time, how many of our people die, or people die on the streets of Vancouver? I said, whatever you read in the paper, you can multiply that by 10 times. And just I think the year before last, you had 365 deaths, so you could figure that out. And that's a direct impact of residential school.
A friend of ours, Sylvia Yellowhorse from Alberta, she died because of alcohol poisoning. She drank so much. So I believe that she was one of the kids that was abused by one of the staff members or a few of the staff members. Oh, this really hurts.
Many of our women, young women especially, are going missing because now, after the residential school abuse and everything is over, they're treating our young women like they're disposable. Nobody seems to care when they do go missing. As far as they're concerned, it's just another dead Indian.
Right now, in the downtown east side, Aboriginal people are the ones that are getting HIV. They're the ones that are getting hepatitis C. We're suffering the most from this, and we just got to stop it somehow. The only way we can stop it is by trying to get